My name is Evelyn Grace Whitmore. I was 31 years old when my mother slapped me in front of 200 wedding guests because I refused to hand over the keys to the penthouse my grandmother left in my name. For years, my family called me difficult when I was only quiet. They called me selfish when I was only tired. They called me ungrateful when I finally stopped paying for things they never thanked me for. But what nobody in that ballroom knew was that my grandmother had seen all of this coming long before she passed away. She had left behind more than a home. She had left behind documents, recordings, and one final instruction that nobody in my family knew existed. And when my earring hit the marble floor that afternoon, something inside me did not break. Something finally became still. I bent down, picked it up, placed it in my palm, and walked out without raising my voice. Then I made one phone call. 1 hour later, a man walked into my sister's wedding reception carrying a brown leather folder. The moment my mother saw his face, she screamed so loudly the music stopped. But to understand why she screamed, you have to understand what kind of daughter I had been trained to become. In my family, love always came with a receipt. My younger sister, Camille, was the beautiful one. The delicate one. The one who was always too sensitive to be held responsible for anything. If she cried, the room moved around her. If I cried, I was told I was being dramatic. My father used to say, "Evelyn is practical. She'll be fine." That sentence followed me like a shadow. When Camille needed a car, my parents called me practical. When my mother wanted her kitchen remodeled, I was practical. When my father's business had a bad quarter, I was practical. When Camille wanted a destination bachelorette weekend she could not afford, somehow I was practical enough to cover half of it. And if I ever hesitated, my mother would sigh like I had personally disappointed heaven. "You know your sister doesn't handle stress well," she would say. "Why do you always have to make everything harder?" So I learned to make things easier. I paid quietly. I showed up early. I stayed late. I fixed problems no one admitted existed. And the whole time, they treated my calmness like proof that I didn't have feelings. The only person who ever saw me clearly was my grandmother, Lenora Whitmore. She lived in a penthouse above the old art district, with wide windows, quiet rooms, and shelves full of books she actually read. When I was little, I thought her home felt like a library floating in the sky. My grandmother never spoke loudly, but when she looked at you, you felt seen. Not watched. Seen. When I was 23, after another family dinner where my mother praised Camille for choosing a salad and criticized me for looking tired, my grandmother asked me to stay behind. She made tea. She put one cup in front of me and said, "Evelyn, people who take from you will always call your boundaries cruelty." I laughed because I thought she was being dramatic. She didn't laugh. She said, "One day, they will ask you for something they have no right to ask for. I want you to remember this conversation when they do." At the time, I didn't know what she meant. Now, before I continue, if you are still listening, please subscribe to this channel. Stories like this are not about revenge. They are about dignity, truth, and the quiet moment when someone finally stops accepting less than they deserve. And comment below if you have ever been treated like the strong one simply because nobody wanted to care for you. When my grandmother died, my family mourned her in public and argued about her belongings in private. My mother wanted her jewelry. My father wanted the investment accounts. Camille wanted the penthouse because, in her words, it matches my lifestyle better. But my grandmother's will was simple. The penthouse belonged to me. Not to my parents. Not to Camille. To me. My mother acted stunned, but not heartbroken. "There is a difference," she said. "Your grandmother must have been confused." My father said, "We'll discuss this later as a family." Camille cried and said, "I don't understand why Grandma would punish me." No one asked how I felt. I did not move into the penthouse right away. For almost a year, I kept my apartment and visited the penthouse on weekends. I cleaned it slowly. I read my grandmother's notes. I found receipts tucked inside books, letters in drawers, and one sealed envelope in her desk with my name written in her careful handwriting. Inside was a letter. She told me she had changed her will 3 years before her death because she had watched my parents pressure me financially for too long. She wrote that the penthouse was not a reward. It was protection. She also wrote that if my family ever tried to force me to surrender it, I should call her attorney, Mr. Alden Pierce. At the bottom of the letter was one sentence I never forgot. Do not argue with people who depend on your silence. Let the truth speak in a room large enough for everyone to hear it. I did not understand then how literal that sentence would become. Camille's wedding was planned like a royal event funded by other people's restraint. The venue was a restored hotel with crystal chandeliers, ivory flowers, and a string quartet playing near the staircase. My parents told everyone it was a family celebration, but most of the family had been quietly asked to contribute. I paid for the welcome dinner. My father called it a gift. My mother called it the least I could do. Camille never called it anything. 3 weeks before the wedding, my parents invited me to brunch. I knew something was wrong because my mother was too pleasant. She complimented my hair. Then she said, "Your sister and Daniel need stability." I placed my fork down. My father cleared his throat. "We think the penthouse would be a perfect wedding gift." I looked at both of them, waiting for the joke. There was none. My mother smiled softly. "You're single, Evelyn. You don't need all that space." I said, "Grandmother left that home to me." My mother's smile disappeared. "She left it to the family," she said. "No," I answered. "She left it to me." That was the first time I said no without explaining it. The silence at that table felt like a door closing. My father leaned forward and said, "Don't embarrass us." I said, "Then don't ask me for something you know isn't yours." My mother's eyes hardened. And for the first time, I saw not disappointment in her face, but calculation. The week before the wedding, messages started coming from cousins I barely spoke to. "Your parents are worried about you. Camille is heartbroken. It's just property. You can always buy another place someday." Nobody asked why a bride needed a $2.1 million penthouse as a wedding gift. Nobody asked why I was expected to give away the only thing my grandmother had protected for me. That is how family pressure works. They make the unreasonable request sound normal by surrounding it with familiar voices. On the morning of the wedding, I wore a navy silk dress and my grandmother's pearl earrings. They were small, simple, and beautiful. I chose them because I wanted to feel like she was near me. I arrived early. I helped fix Camille's veil. I found extra pins when the florist forgot them. I calmed my mother when the seating chart had one wrong name. I smiled in photos. I did everything the practical daughter always did. Then, right before dinner, my father took the microphone. At first, I thought he was making a toast. He spoke about family, sacrifice, unity, the importance of building a future together. Then he turned toward me. "Evelyn," he said, smiling as if we had rehearsed this. "Your mother and I know you wanted to make a special gesture today." My stomach went cold. Camille looked down at her bouquet. Daniel, her new husband, stared at the floor. My mother walked toward me holding a small silver tray. On it was an envelope. My father continued, "We thought this would be the perfect moment for you to give Camille and Daniel the keys to the penthouse, as your grandmother would have wanted." 200 people turned to look at me. There are humiliations that happen quickly, and there are humiliations that expand slowly in the air until everyone breathes them in. This was the second kind. My mother stood in front of me, smiling for the guests. "Go on," she whispered. "Don't ruin your sister's day." I looked at the envelope. Inside were transfer papers. They had prepared them without my consent. My hands did not shake. That surprised me. I said quietly, "No." My mother's smile froze. My father laughed once, like I had missed my cue. "Evelyn," he said into the microphone, still pretending this was charming. "Now is not the time." I looked at Camille. She would not meet my eyes. I looked back at my father and said, "You're right. This should never have been brought here." The room changed. My mother stepped closer. Her voice dropped so low only the front tables could hear. "You selfish little girl." I said nothing. She grabbed my wrist, trying to press the envelope into my hand. I pulled my arm back. And then she slapped me. Not lightly. Not in panic. She slapped me with the full force of a woman who believed I would never defend myself in public. My head turned. My pearl earring flew off and skidded across the marble floor. The room went silent. I remember the sound of the earring more than the pain. A small, bright sound. Like something precious leaving its place. My cheek burned. My eyes watered. Not from weakness. From shock. My mother's breathing was uneven. My father whispered, "Margaret." Camille finally looked up. And I bent down. Slowly. I picked up my grandmother's earring. I held it in my palm. Then I looked at my mother and said, "You should not have done that." No shouting. No insult. No threat. Just the truth. Then I walked out. Behind me, I heard chairs moving, people whispering, my father calling my name as if I were the one who had caused the scene. Outside the ballroom, the hallway was quiet and gold-lit. I stood beside a window, opened my clutch, and took out the card I had carried for 7 years. Alden Pierce, attorney at law. I called him. He answered on the second ring. I said, "Mr. Pierce, it happened." There was a pause. Then he said, "Are you safe?" That question almost made me cry. Not "What did you do?" Not "Are you sure?" Not "Can this wait?" "Are you safe?" I said yes. He said, "Stay where you are. I'll be there within the hour." I sat in the hotel lobby with my cheek swelling and my earring still in my hand. A young server brought me a glass of water without asking. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, but she only whispered, "I'm sorry." Sometimes strangers show more tenderness than people who share your blood. While I waited, my phone filled with messages. "Dad, come back now." "Mom, you embarrassed this family." "Camille, why are you doing this to me?" "A cousin, couldn't you just sign and deal with it later?" I turned the phone face down. For once, I did not explain. If you are listening to this and you have spent your life explaining your pain to people committed to misunderstanding it, please write "I choose peace" in the comments. Not because everything is easy, but because peace begins the moment you stop negotiating your dignity. 48 minutes later, Mr. Alden Pierce walked through the hotel doors. He was older than I remembered, with silver hair, a dark suit, and the same calm expression he had worn at my grandmother's funeral. In his right hand, he carried a brown leather folder. He looked at my cheek. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed gentle. "Evelyn," he said, "would you like to leave?" I looked toward the ballroom doors. Through them, I could hear music again. They had restarted the celebration as if nothing had happened. I thought of my grandmother's letter. Let the truth speak in a room large enough for everyone to hear it. I said, "No. I want to go back in." He nodded once. Not proudly. Not dramatically. Just respectfully. When we entered the ballroom, conversations faded one table at a time. My mother saw him first. Her champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered near her feet. Then she screamed, "What is he doing here?" The musician stopped. My father stood so quickly his chair hit the floor behind him. Camille went pale. That was when I understood something important. They knew him. Not just as my grandmother's attorney. They knew exactly what he carried. Mr. Pierce did not raise his voice. "Good evening," he said. "I apologize for interrupting the reception. I was contacted by Ms. Evelyn Whitmore regarding an attempted coercive transfer of real property." My mother shouted, "This is a private family matter." Mr. Pierce looked at her calmly. "Mrs. Whitmore, you made it public when you presented legal documents to your daughter in front of 200 witnesses." A murmur moved through the room. My father stepped forward. "Alden, this is unnecessary." "No," Mr. Pierce said. "It became necessary the moment you involved unauthorized transfer papers." My mother's face changed from anger to fear so quickly I almost missed it. Mr. Pierce opened the folder. He did not hand anything to me. He did not need to. He began with facts. The penthouse had been purchased solely by my grandmother 15 years earlier. The deed had been transferred into a protected trust 5 years before her death. I was the sole beneficiary. The trust contained a specific clause preventing sale, transfer, or shared ownership under family pressure for 10 years after inheritance. My grandmother had added that clause herself. My mother whispered, "That's not true." Mr. Pierce removed a document. "It is true. You received a copy after probate." My father looked down. And there it was. The first crack. He had known. My mother had known. They had both known the penthouse could not legally be handed over, even if I had signed under pressure that day. So why stage the moment? Because they did not need the law to agree. They needed me to fold. Mr. Pierce continued. There is also a written record of repeated financial pressure placed on Ms. Whitmore over several years, including requests tied to family events, business expenses, and wedding costs. My mother snapped, she offered. I finally spoke. No. I was trained not to refuse. The room went still again. I did not say it angrily. That made it worse for them. Because anger can be dismissed. Calm truth is harder to escape. Mr. Pierce then looked at my father. Mr. Whitmore, I would advise you not to continue pursuing this matter. Mrs. Lenora Whitmore anticipated this possibility. My father's face strained. Camille stood up. What does that mean? No one answered her. So Mr. Pierce did. Your grandmother left a sealed statement to be opened only if an attempt was made to pressure Evelyn into surrendering the penthouse. My mother shook her head. No. No, she wouldn't. Mr. Pierce removed a cream envelope. My grandmother's handwriting was on the front. To be read if they make Evelyn pay for their pride. That sentence broke something open in the room. Mr. Pierce asked me, "Do you want me to read it?" I looked at my mother. For the first time all day, she looked small. Not harmless. Just small. I said, yes. Mr. Pierce read my grandmother's words. She wrote that she loved both granddaughters, but she had watched a pattern form in our family. Camille was protected from discomfort, while I was assigned responsibility without gratitude. My parents had borrowed money from me under emotional pressure. They had framed obligation as love. They had mistaken my silence for consent. Then came the part that made my mother cover her mouth. My grandmother wrote that 2 years before her death, my parents had asked her to change the will and leave the penthouse to Camille because Camille needed the image more. The image. Not the home. Not the safety. The image. My grandmother refused. And after that refusal, she began documenting everything. My father sat down. Camille started crying, but for once, nobody rushed to comfort her. Mr. Pierce finished the letter with my grandmother's final line. Evelyn does not owe anyone the roof I placed over her life. I closed my eyes. For 7 years, I had carried that home like a secret I was not allowed to enjoy. In that moment, it became what my grandmother meant it to be. Shelter. Not luxury. Shelter. My mother suddenly pointed at me. You planned this. I looked at her. No, I said. Grandmother did. That was the moment she lost control. Not because I attacked her. Not because I humiliated her. Because the one person whose approval she had always performed for had seen her clearly. And had written it down. She began shouting that the letter was cruel, that old people misunderstand things, that I had poisoned my grandmother against them. But every sentence made the room quieter. She was not being destroyed by me. She was being revealed by herself. My father tried to stop her. Camille whispered, "Mom, please." But my mother kept going. She always thought she was better than us, she said, pointing at me. Sitting there quietly, judging everyone. I looked at her and said, I wasn't judging. I was surviving. That ended it. Not loudly. Not perfectly. But enough. Mr. Pierce placed the documents back into the folder and turned to me. Evelyn, would you like to proceed with the formal notice? My father looked up sharply. What notice? I answered this time. The notice that you are no longer permitted to contact me about the penthouse, my finances, or grandmother's estate. Any future communication goes through Mr. Pierce. Camille stared at me. So you're cutting us off? I looked at my sister in her wedding dress, surrounded by flowers I had helped pay for, in a room where she had allowed me to be publicly cornered. No, I said. I'm cutting off access to what was never yours. That distinction mattered. Because I was not closing my heart out of hatred. I was closing a door they kept using to walk over me. Mr. Pierce and I left soon after. No dramatic exit. No applause. No final insult. Just footsteps across marble. This time I did not drop anything. Outside, the night air touched my cheek, and I realized I had been holding my breath for years. The weeks that followed were not easy. People like to imagine justice feels instantly clean. It does not. Justice can feel lonely at first. My mother sent long messages. Then angry ones. Then tearful ones. My father asked to meet man to man, as if adulthood only counted when he needed something. Camille sent one message that said, "You ruined my wedding." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I replied, "No. I refuse to let you ruin my life." That was the last direct message I sent for months. I started therapy. Not because I was broken. Because I was finally safe enough to tell the truth without minimizing it. I moved fully into my grandmother's penthouse that autumn. The first night, I sat by the window with tea in one of her old cups. The city lights looked soft from above, like the world had lowered its voice for me. I placed the pearl earring back in its box. The clasp had bent from the fall. I never repaired it. I kept it that way as a reminder. Not of the slap. Of the moment I bent down and chose myself. My father eventually wrote a letter. A real one. No excuses at first. Then a few excuses in the middle. Then, near the end, one honest sentence. I knew it was wrong, and I let it happen because your mother was easier to obey than the truth. It was not enough. But it was a beginning. Camille reached out almost a year later. She was separated from Daniel by then. The marriage had not survived the pressure, the debt, or the image they built it on. She asked if we could talk. I agreed to meet her in a public cafe. She looked older. So did I, probably. She cried, but quietly this time. She said, I thought love meant everyone giving me what I needed. I said, that's not love. That's control with softer language. She nodded. I did not forgive her that day. But I listened. Sometimes dignity means walking away. Sometimes it means returning with boundaries strong enough to protect the person you have become. My mother never apologized in a way that mattered. She apologized for how things looked. She apologized for the misunderstanding. She apologized that I felt hurt. But she never apologized for raising a hand to me. So I kept distance. Peace sometimes looks rude to people who benefited from your chaos. And I made peace with that. Years later, when people ask me why I did not expose them sooner, I tell them the truth. I was not waiting for revenge. I was waiting until I no longer needed them to understand me. That is a different kind of freedom. My grandmother's penthouse is still mine. But the real inheritance was not the property. It was the permission to stop proving my worth to people committed to spending it. I learned that calm is not weakness. Silence is not consent. Family is not a license to take. And love that requires you to disappear is not love at all. The day my mother slapped me, everyone thought they were watching a daughter finally being put in her place. They were wrong. They were watching a woman quietly step out of the place they had built for her. And once I stepped out, I never went back. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe, and share in the comments what part touched you the most. Maybe someone else reading your words will find the courage to pick up their own broken piece, stand up calmly, and walk toward the truth waiting for them.